Hey, it's Ross Payton with Roleplaying Public Radio. This episode 171, the SCP Foundation. And with me is a special guest, Vince, who writes for the SCP Foundation or is a editor. Vince, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Hi, yeah, I'm Vince. I am known on the wiki as Vivax. Right now, I'm not super heavily involved in editing. I'm more on the outreach team. So if you bother the SCP Foundation's Twitter, you'll bother me directly. Uh, but I've spent a lot of time on the wiki, and it's been sort of my go-to fiction writing project for a while.
Mm-hmm. So the idea behind this episode came about because, in our last episode, we talked about bureaucracies. And of course, we mentioned the SCP Foundation as sort of a horrific bureaucracy in many ways, and as a way to sort of inspire using bureaucracy in your games. And then, of course, I realized I actually knew Vince, from the internet, as an online friend, and so I was like, well, why not? And Vince, who actually messaged, you could have just asked, and I'm like, oh yeah, I totally could have done that. In hindsight, I should have. So
Well,
but
I mean,
yeah,
I messaged you because you were mentioning me by name a lot. I was like,
yeah,
this is really funny.
yeah,
So why not
uh
just have this happen?
yep. Did not even occur. So but yeah, we're still in October. We're still in spoopy month, spoopy skeleton month. And what's spoopier than the SCP Foundation? The Yeah. So we are going to delve more into that. And so for those of the listeners who are not extremely online and may not be aware of the SCP Foundation, can you first explain what the basic premise of it is?
So the basic premise of the SCP Foundation is that it is a collaborative fiction writing website where people write short stories in the format of like an executive summary of how to imprison a supernatural object or thing or person. It started because of a creepypasta post that was originally put on X on 4chan and has sort of spun out into this massive, sprawling wiki with multiple competing canons, hundreds of tales, thousands of objects or supernatural things, and it's premised on this like found horror, archival horror sort of thing, where the the adherence to the format and tone uh sort of belie the deeper horror. Every article is supposed to greet you like an iceberg with the understanding that there's a lot of iceberg that you're not seeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yeah, it is. The implication is everything, which is sort of a core horror tenet. But this is sort of taking it to, I guess, the ultimate degree by using the rigid and formal language of bureaucracy with the occasional, blacked out, well, more than occasional, blacked out, redacted, black bars, to describe utterly horrific and impossible things. And there have been novels, short stories, but also video games, and there's an animated film or sort of cartoon series on YouTube. There's a lot for the SCP
There is a
Foundation.
lot. One of my pieces was actually featured in that cartoon series.
Oh, cool. Which one?
Yeah, the guy reached out to me and I didn't see the message in the internal like wiki DMs for months because grad school. So it was sort of a pleasant surprise as I was leaving.
Oh, what a contribution made it to the series?
It was SCP 1836, which is sort of a take on the origin story of Sedna, the Inuit goddess of mammalian sea life, which function as her fingers. Long story short, you probably shouldn't attempt to imprison a force of nature, especially if you don't know what the fuck you're doing.
Yeah. And of course, yeah, that's the whole thing about that is imprisoning things for the SCP Foundation, because it means secure, contain, protect. And of course, that what they're securing and containing is pretty obvious, but what they're protecting is are they protecting the thing, or are they protecting everyone else from the thing?
The answer is yes. Like the idea of the status, the idea of the SCP Foundation is that they are trying to maintain the status quo, uh, the normalcy of the outside world, but also not just destroy things because they don't know which of these anomalies are like load bearing in sort of a reality maintaining sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and even if they did, they would want to understand what's causing it because they assume that anomalous things are fundamentally understandable through science. Uh, it just might take a while.
Mm-hmm.
So the
Uh,
the the philosophy is, I guess, partially reactionary in that the Foundation's completely committed to maintaining the world as it is,
right. They're
which
very
can lead to
centrist.
some really
Yeah.
interesting spins.
Yeah. So obviously for role playing games, there's tons and tons of material to use. For one thing, the SCP Foundation is my understanding is sort of like a Creative Commons thing. Anybody can kind of use it for non-commercial purposes. Is that sort of
Yeah,
the
that's
general
correct.
idea?
Every article, every story, every page on the wiki is licensed through. I actually have a page open. CC 3.0, share and share alike, attribution share alike license. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you can't make money by making SCP RPG, but you could certainly have a lot of fun by writing up SCP Foundation stats for your favorite horror game, or making your own contributions to it. So in terms of, it's all fair game, in other words, for your own RPG adventures.
Yep.
So
So
yeah.
long as if you actually put something out on the internet that you attempt to establish some kind of authorship, so
Mm-hmm.
like linking back to the article, looking at who created the page or looking at like author pages is sort of something you have to do if you're going
Mm-hmm.
to use SCP stuff. Otherwise, my friend in the copyright department will email you.
Mm. Okay.
Friendly, he's friendly, but he will email you. Yeah.
Fair enough. But obviously there's far more material in the SCP Foundation wiki than any one GM or player could ever use. And I think there's a lot of material to use to mine for gaming stuff, not just for the GM but for the player as well, because the SCP Foundation, aside from the main focus obviously on sort of the objects and the creatures, the entities that it kind of contains, but there's also a lot of focuses on the organization itself and the people who run it and the people who are like, I forgot who are the people who are the sort of test subjects. What are they called?
Class D, but
Yeah.
in terms of like how the wiki's been going, they've been sort of de-emphasized because there was sort of this period of overemphasis on them to the point where it
Mm-hmm.
became absurd to consider that you had this high a level of like disposable test subjects for things.
Mm-hmm.
So their status within like the way the community thinks about like what they are for and who these people are is like kind of shifting right now.
Okay.
I don't think there's
Um.
been a consensus yet.
Mhm.
So yeah. But originally they were like basically criminals on death row who were brought into this instead. But like, it at a certain point when you have this many like bizarre concurrent experimental supernatural things, it's just it just I think even in the United States, which has a pretty substantial over incarceration problem, you're going to run into a supply issue,
Yeah.
to say nothing of the human rights issue.
Yeah. That's fair. But still, like that's, obviously player character background. I was a Class D test subject until I escaped. At least I thought I escaped.
Right?
Maybe they
Yeah,
let me
that's
go. Yeah.
yeah.
But there's also like multiple factions within the SCP, and there's depending on the canon, various antagonist organizations like the Chaos Insurgency, which is a great band name for a thrash metal band. So, um, I think. But yeah, and so there's a lot to work with in terms of that. So, but since you know the SCP Foundation a lot better than I do, like what are sort of like what's your primary advice for people who are looking at it for mining it for gaming RPG stuff?
So, I mean, I guess the first thing I'd ask is that people like, if you're going to use this stuff, is to narrow your focus. This is a pretty full buffet with a lot of stuff, and you want to pick and choose maybe a few things to emphasize, and then gradually titrate in other things, or don't. Um, Otherwise, things can become pretty a lot really quickly. Like it's just there's just a lot of stuff to use here. So when the SCP Foundation was running a community RP on our like IRC server, we focused our role playing game around SCP 354, the Red Pool, which is this pool of red liquid in northern Canada that periodically discharges strange things, strange life, and may or may not lead to another place.
Mm-hmm.
And the purpose of this RP was basically you are agents, you are staff, you're researchers at this facility containing this thing, and every once in a while you may be called away to do something else, or you may need to do something in the pool. Um, so the limiting the scope of it to this one very strange thing really allowed us to explore the red pool in depth, and also introduce elements as needed to introduce complications. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, there's a group of interest. Groups of interest are rival factions within the SCP Foundation universe that also traffic in anomalous or supernatural things. We had a break-in by uh, basically an acquisitions person from a group called Marshall Carter and Dark, which is like Sotheby's for rich assholes who want to have like supernatural anomalous stuff to like play with and use on people. So we had to deal with like the possibility of a containment breach because somebody wanted to like uh have a creepy creature from the Red Pool universe like as a pet, essentially a pet that you feed people to.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. So yeah, I think that's I mean, that's obviously a great premise for not just a one shot, but like an entire campaign, for like say the Esoterrorist or something, or well, yeah, any of your modern horror games, I think would work with the SCP Foundation. Um,
Yeah, like I think that the cool thing about the SP Foundation is like depending on like how you want to structure it, it can fit into a bunch of different systems. So if you really want to focus on like the containment of horror sort of thing, you can probably run it in like a modded Delta Green or Esoterrorists. But if you wanted to make this more of like a something that explores the setting from another perspective, say imprisoning things because they are anomalous is bad. Um, Maybe running a Fate game using the Serpent's Hand as your protagonist organization. The Serpent's Hand is this secret collective of people spread all over the world who freely use supernatural things. They're basically the freedom fighting wizards faction. Um, and their base is within an infinite library that lies outside of and within space time. It's not really clear. It's sort of a dumping ground for everything's written works, everything's knowledge that extends infinitely. And it has portals to basically anywhere. So it's a good hub world, but it's also a good like organizational structure if you're going to like stick it to the man. Yeah.
Interesting. So yeah, I think when we were talking about this before, you sort of described this the SCP as sort of a genre of literature more than anything else, because I think for a lot of people, myself included, when I think of the SCP Foundation, I just think, oh, cool things that I can grab for games, and that's kind of like you described it as a trap of just thinking of them as monster and magic item lists.
Yeah, I mean, like, I've been sort of marinating in this for a while, so I was like seeking out sort of strange new media studies people to sort of like structure some of my thoughts on this, and I encountered some writing by I can't remember specifically who that sort of postulates that the wiki is the text itself, like the amalgamation of the articles, the collaborative effort, the community as author means that the SCP Foundation constitutes sort of a novel genre of sci-fi or a novel medium of literature.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so to consider like each article in a vacuum is to really like disregard uh, sort of how the wiki was formed and like what each article is saying in dialogue with each other. So it's really better treated as like a setting or as like a place for from in an RPG context as a setting or like a place to mine like premises from rather than
Mm-hmm.
like as a place to get monsters from. I mean, you could certainly do it, but the interesting thing about the wiki is that like you have a lot of people who have spent a lot of time getting the ethos of an organization that like puts these things essentially in perpetual preservation for, you know, shady reasons, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the and there's also the sort of the philosophical differences within the SCP Foundation as to like how to use anomalous things if you're going to, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
some people write stories where different anomalies contain each other in like perpetual feedback loops. Some things are just uncontainable. So like, yeah, it's a diverse ecosystem, and it's actually gone through a bunch of different like literary movements. Uh, Early stuff is like very hard on the grim, dark, creepy stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but then there's like a backlash that leads into the more comedic and pulpy, and then a further backlash that leads it more into this like sort of new sci-fi. Um, it's interesting, and I think you kind of have to like if you're going to use it, do a fair bit of homework just so you get the tone that you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had not realized that there was like different movements within the SCP about, but I mean that makes sense. It's been around for a while now. Like
Yeah, it's like 10 years old, which is like
yeah.
an eternity in internet time, and it's managed to survive like the eternal September and like multiple attempts to take over it from like people that don't really care about writing as such or like playing in the setting as such, but just sort of want to like shit post.
Mm-hmm.
Shit posting has become a genre of SCP itself. Like there's an entire group called Gamers Against Weed, which is just like the SCP Foundation trying to reckon with like Tumblrite culture. It's yeah. So
Interesting.
so we've absorbed the
Yeah.
shit posters and turned them into a group of interest. Like
Mm-hmm.
it, you know, and also the people who write on the wiki have like grown up substantially too. It's not all high schoolers anymore. It's like people have like lives and families now. I'm like 30, right? But like Clef, who is like one of the original admins and is like, you know, one of the central characters of the wiki, is like a guy with kids now. And he's
Mm-hmm.
gone through and he's changed his old articles to, you know, not necessarily be like better in the sense of like better writing, but like better in the sense that like he's matured and his perspective has matured and like the kind of horror or the kind of tone he's going for is like more nuanced, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's done this partially as a project because like his kids might come into it and he doesn't necessarily want them to see something that was written by him as an edgelord teen.
All right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Um, yeah. Wow. Yeah. It's grown up. But yeah, that means there's like 10 years worth of material now to sort of sort through.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know when I've gone to the wiki, I would just like look for the thing top rated entries and like read through some of those. And then because there's so much, that was more than enough to sort of like fill my idle time. But we're looking at this perspective of people who are looking for stuff for RPGs. So some of the entries are more gameable than others. I think some of the more absolute, end of the world ones that are cosmic and powerful and et cetera, aren't necessarily as gameable as like, here's a weird thing and it kills people every once in a while, but we're not sure how.
Yeah.
So how to the novice, how would you advise them in exploring the wiki in terms of finding things? Would you like look for category or theme first, or are there any curated lists of these kind of things?
So one of the things I would do, once you've like gotten a feel for the wiki by like seeing what's oldest and most popular, I guess, is to look at what's top rated and new, which will kind of give you a feel for like what the site is doing now, like what the hot new things on the market are, I guess. Um, but I mean, once you've done that, it's about like exploring tags and looking for tales with interesting titles or looking through canons, right? So if I were trying to set a game in this universe, I would probably look for an SCP that can sort of function as like an enduring setting element rather than looking for something that is just sort of a scary monster or a unconfrontable world-ending threat. So like if you're like writing an SCP sort of game out, like going to like SCP 3008, which is the infinite IKEA, and sort of like using that as like this persistent setting, uh to like the setting element, like you are people who are tasked with going into the infinite IKEA and pulling civilians out, who or you are people who are anthropologists who are tasked with studying the rudimentary civilization that has developed within the IKEA. Uh, like that, I think would make like a fairly robust like short campaign. Um,
Yeah, I like the
or
Infinite IKEA too, because that was the one. Well, that was featured in the cartoon,
yeah,
and a very good episode with that.
yeah. I mean, the cartoon's also a really good source for just like what's in the wiki that isn't like obvious, right? Like because that guy is like I can't remember his name, but like the creator of that series is like really good at finding um SCPs that are sort of off the beaten track to use as like fodder for his show. Um the other really good source for things is just the groups of interest list, right? So like I mentioned before we started recording that the wiki that the universe of the wiki is set in isn't just like the Foundation and nothing else. It's part of an ecosystem of different competing interests who all want supernatural things to go in a particular way. And playing those off each other in sort of like a game of like paranormal politics is like it's a potentially rich area of play, right? So like you can like explore the difference between like the SP Foundation, which is all about containing and studying things, with the way that the GOC, the Global Occult Division, which is like if the UN peacekeepers were like kind of a shoot first, ask questions later organization and also were supernatural, like if comparing and contrasting those like motives and motivations is like a potentially really interesting place to go. It's also a really good place for like characters to come from, right? Like you have all of these different factions within the universe. You've got like the Church of the Broken God, who are these people who believe very strongly in this thing, this clockwork deity that they replace their bodies with machine parts. They're sort of like a steampunk religious Borg. Like that's a potentially really interesting like faction to have a character come from or have a player character group confront. There's the Serpent's Hand, which is like the freedom fighting wizards group. I mean, like, these are people that reached out into the darkness and embraced it and felt the darkness embrace them back, but not in a creepy way, in like a warm and fuzzy sort of way. Um, you could even do like a full like X-Files type thing using the unusual instance unit, which is like the criminally underfunded part of the FBI that deals with the anomalous. So there's a lot of like very real, very rich stuff for a player character to have been a part of, or for an SCP focused like game to use. Uh, and it's not even like you have to go super deep into this stuff. Like groups of interest is like just one of the like links on the sidebar of the wiki under GOI. So
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, there's a lot of really interesting things. It's interesting to see that some of these have a very like the sheer range of sort of aesthetic in terms of like the sort of traditional horror things, and then we have things like Are We Cool Yet? Is Are We Cool Yet part of the shit posting thing? I mean, it kind of looks like that.
Are We Cool Yet is like an anarchist anomalist artist collective.
Mm-hmm.
They are like a fringe artistic surrealist movement that is trying to make the surreal real. If you click the link on Are You Cool Yet, it leads you to a page with a photo of SCP-173, which is like the statue, the famous one that started the wiki, with like a take on Snipa and Peep. This is not an SCP written underneath it. Like the the point of Are We Cool Yet is like, can we take the anomalous and use it as like a source of art and a source of commentary? But like the danger of this group is that like you get like artists who are kind of blasé about safety, uh, and so some of their works are like not super great from the perspective of the Foundation. But I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if you're gonna make outsider art, why not like really triple down and make it super super outside the laws of physics, for example?
Hey, yeah. Um, I like that because I remember one of the earliest SCP entries was that King in Yellow esque play about the Hangman, and I could see this group being interested in that kind of thing. But yeah, and then there's like a restaurant, and then but there's some more edgelordy factions too, like the Factory,
Right.
and nobody knows anything about it because it's so weird, and it's kind of interesting to see the different styles of authorship too, because some are more traditional, like balanced within it, but some are like this is it's kind of like the RPG problem. Like my original character is more powerful than your original character. Well, my original faction is more powerful than the other original factions. So I guess part of the SCP thing is how do you do that balancing in terms of like power? Because there is that sort of like my edgelord with a katana and trench coat is cooler than your edgelord with a katana and trench coat.
I mean,
So
I think the key here is that like none of these factions can be the most powerful, because the anomalous things that exist within the universe are more powerful than any of them. Like if you look at specific entries and entities, like the point of the setting is that there's this competing ecosystem of like weirdos doing weird things. It's sort of unknown armies esque in that way, but like none of these people and none of these organizations are like actually um like really able to assert control over everything, right? Like there's this good like ongoing thing between the SCP Foundation and the Fifth Church, which is this religious organization that is all about like transcendence. There's sort of a new agey thing
mhm.
that has sort of strange effects on the way the world works around them. And there was an incident where they almost like completely overran the entire like southern part of the United States, because a book of theirs became a bestseller and the Foundation wasn't really paying attention. So like it it's not a matter of like who is biggest and baddest, because like no matter who you are in this setting, there's always something bigger and badder that like you may not even know is there. Um, like the library, even though it plays host to the Serpent's Hand, is itself its own entity. It has its own rules, it has its own mind, it has its own like beings that it commands, and it's not really beholden to anyone or anything. It simply exists for its own ends. So the fact that there are so many things like that within the setting means that nobody can actually like win or dominate. So it's just a matter of like restraining your own edgelord tendencies. Like don't like like bite down on any one group and make them like the one true thing, because there is no one true thing. There is no canon. That's kind of the point.
Oh, okay. Because yeah, that seems to be the problem with a lot of collaborative projects, is especially when there's RPG or sort of speculative fiction elements, is that the thing that I'm interested in is the most special and unique part of this setting, not your stuff. So I guess yeah, but with the SCP Foundation is like let everything in, and then like I think you described it as like a buffet table, just pick and choose what you want, or a la carte. That was it.
Yeah, it's a buffet. It's an a la carte. Like there are certainly like groups of authors that sort of compete interpersonally to like promote their own stuff, but it's not as if anybody really organizes against other people's work. In fact, downvoting campaigns are like forbidden as like part of site culture, and if you're found to have been organizing one, like it's grounds for banning. So like there's a lot of like positive competition in like, yes, do your best work and put it out there, but like there's not really a strong cultural motivation to like destroy other people's work. Not really. So I guess the reason why everything is so extra on the wiki is because everybody is trying to be extra in a particular way, which
yeah, I mean that's kind of that's just sort of endemic to role playing
yeah.
in general. So the so once the thing is once you get a you pick your group of interests, or you pick there's also I think we got to mention canon. There is like an actual canon hub with different canons that sort of describe not just like what if you want. So again, choosing like what flavor of SCP you want, and I like the canon page because it has a little summary, a little teaser of like what each one is about, and like I just clicked on Unfounded, and has there's also stories aside from that, but yeah, like going back to the actual thing. So once you sort of burrow down, the standard format for an SCP entry is written in a very bureaucratic language, and this is kind of like the sort of meat and potatoes of the wiki is the individual entry, isn't it? Or I mean,
yeah, there's the wiki entries like by far outnumber the majority, like they're in the majority of like things on the wiki. So yeah, the way I tend to read an SCP is to like, for the most part, skip past the special containment procedures, which is like the first thing in the article is like, here's how you keep this thing in a box. And then I read the description first and go back to the containment procedures because they make more sense with that context. And then I sort of like get into the stuff at the end, like addendas and other things. It's sort of like trying to figure out how to read like a scientific document. Like you want to look at introduction, you want to look at conclusion, and then like go back into the results and methods section to see if the conclusion is supported by the results and methods. Like, what is your argument and like what are you doing? Yeah. So I mean, does that answer the question, or did I go off on a
yeah. No, I mean that's sort of like, again, for people who aren't familiar with it, this is sort of a good way of approaching it. And Yeah, and that's the one I'm most familiar with. Like, I was, looking through the Serpent's Hand, so I clicked on something, and then it led me to SCP-2344, which is actually a place, a series of tunnels, uh, that extends through various extra dimensional spaces. Um, so I guess what other kind of formats are popular on? Are there? I mean, I know there's stories, there's like normal fiction, but are there any other kind of unusual document formats?
Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of the groups of interest have their own document formats for like whatever they're doing internally. Um, the Serpent's Hand has their own side wiki called the Wanderer's Library, which is a collection of like uh magical realist and surrealist fiction that is set within the universe but is not necessarily tied to anything on the wiki itself. It's like a different kind of repository. Um
Hmm.
and there's yeah, so yeah, I think that answers the question. There
Yeah, yeah.
are other document types. There are like religious bits. There's entire side wikis, and you have the hubs for each group of interest that sort of give you like a brief explainer as to what the group is about, and also like which SCPs are known to be connected to it, and so on. So like there are a lot of things like that in the wiki. There's also like art on the wiki. Um, Sunny, I think it's Sunny Parallax does a ton of like art on their author page where they will draw everything in sort of a hypergraphic style, almost like they're doing logos for every single thing on the wiki. So there's like some good evocative images too that are just sort of free to use.
Oh,
Uh,
cool. Yeah, there's even their own artwork hub. Um, of course, it's very classified. Look only at your own risk.
yeah,
Uh,
there's also the deviant art community that does stuff for the wiki. Like there's just there's a group of fan artists. Like there's a lot of stuff you can use. It's just a matter of like devoting some time and attention to it. If you're GMing, you should probably do that anyway.
yeah, that's fair. Um, so there's a tons of material out there. So way more than any one person could look at. What do you are there any particular like canon hubs or entries that you feel are better for game like one just sort of what are there in particular canon hubs you think are better for gaming than others, especially for like again modern occult horror is kind of what we're looking at. But well, I mean, you mentioned like SCP even goes into other genres. Like there's less, like we think of the SCP as a very grim dark horrific thing, but there's clearly some people turning it into like more well, like you said, magical realism or that kind of thing, fantasy, or even like more traditional science fiction. So I don't know, what do you think in terms of general hubs would be a good place for starting points?
So in terms of like different, so in terms of like different canons or like different things in particular.
We'll start with canons first, and then go into like the best entries that you feel are underserved, or like if you really need a one shot, look at these entries. But we'll start with the canons.
Okay, so in
Uh,
terms of canons, like there's a really good canon for like sort of sword and sorcery style play called Bellerverse, which is like thousands of years after the end of the world. The surviving humans basically are dealing with the remnants of the SCP Foundation's failure and unfinished work. It's like kind of, it's not really Conan esque. It's a little more
Thundar.
no, it's as if you merge like the sword and sandal genre with like some bits of the Dark Ages and also a little bit of like um the weirdness of the Dark Souls games, right? Sort of like the
Mm-hmm.
sort of environmental sad storytelling. If you're looking for like, people on a quest to like fix the world sort of stuff in like a fantasy-esque setting, that would be very good. It'd just be kind of a dark fantasy. Um,
Mm-hmm.
if you wanted to do more um spy versus spy stuff, I'd click through the Coldest War, which is like basically like the SCP Foundation competing as like a proxy arm of the US government with communist powers for control over anomalous things. So it's like Cold War spying plus um, anomalous stuff, plus like should the Foundation like even be involved in this politicking? Should we just like retreat into ourselves and do what we need to do in order to prevent the world from ending? Um, Yeah.
Nice.
I'd plug my own canon that I was involved in, but like it's really not very gameable, even though it's called
Hmm.
the only game in town. Because it's just very surreal. It's not super good for that. Like
Right.
it's based on that play SCP you were talking about earlier, but like as like the it's basically like the play is a sensory organ for like an eldritch being that hates literacy. So like probably not something for a game unless you're like
Oh, is it based on that one entity that is done entirely in pictographs? That
no, that came later, but like if we I mean like if I were to write in that can again, I would certainly incorporate it, you know. Uh
Yeah. What entry is that? That one is great.
I don't remember. It's very good though.
Yeah.
Um in terms of like specific SCPs that are um good for like
It's 2521, and I will make sure to make a note of that so I can put it in the show notes. Just yeah, because there are so we'll talk about individual entries in a bit, but yeah, sorry, continue.
sure. I was about to just switch over to
Okay.
individual entries, but like off the top of my head, those are two very good canons to use for like RPG settings stuff. Um, as far as like individual entries, SCP-093, the Red Sea object, it's very good for that in that like it's basically a discus that when applied to a mirror uh, opens a portal to you know another reality, a reality that appears to have ended, um, where these like large uh, creatures with gigantic arms that are sort of humanoid but unspeaking crawl around ruined cities. There was some sort of like thing that happened there that is clearly very bad that ended the world and put it into that state. So as far as like an SCP entry that would like really work for like sort of a long form exploratory sort
Mm-hmm.
of game, messing with the Red Sea object and its sort of space time traveling stuff to this other world would be really cool. I don't know if you've seen Noen, which is like this anime about that same concept, but it could easily like get you that kind of feel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, just looking for more entries now. There's just so many, and I know I don't have them all like memorized. It's
Yeah,
basically
25.
impossible to keep up. Uh,
Yeah. That is true. I mean, how big is the community, do you think? Um,
Active people, there's usually about 1,000 people active at any given time. Um, because like newly created pages can like get hundreds of upvotes within like a couple weeks. Uh,
mhm.
so it's probably under 1,000 people actively, but there's more than 1,000 people who are affiliated with the wiki who log in every day and like plot and like poke around and do stuff.
Mhm.
Um, because you can get like articles that take off pretty quickly and like get a couple thousand upvotes on them. Uh, now. Back when I started, it was a really big deal when you got your first 100 upvotes, and now it's like the 1,000 mark is the high mark.
Like I know of the SCP Wiki. I've known it for years. Every once in a while, I go back to it, but I'm certainly not an active user by any means. I don't know. I don't think I even have an account. I might have an account. I don't remember. It has been around for 10 years, but there's like its impact is obviously much larger than these 1,000 people because, like, you
Yeah,
know,
because it's like it's been around for so long, and it's been like stable for so long and creating so much, it's been creating so much content for so long that like it's become a part of internet culture too. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's bigger than any one author and bigger than any one entry.
I know it was kind of funny. Like, I remember seeing you chat like about how all these articles about the recent video game Control were all talking about how it's clearly influenced by the SCP Foundation, but yet none of them would actually link to the SCP Foundation website in
Yeah,
these articles. Which is like, I mean, the Control is fine, but like it's far more tame than the any
yeah.
of the SCP canons.
I mean
Because
that was definitely like a problem with some of my takes on these things. But the other problem is that like it just didn't seem to treat like a stable internet writing community like terribly seriously. You know, like the Slenderman stuff was big for a while, but it just sort of went away. And other creepypastas have been archived on creepypasta wikis, but they haven't like turned into their own animal, like not in the way that this has.
mm-hmm.
And I'm not just talking as like a person who's like invested time into this, but like you can cosplay as like SCP characters and people recognize you at cons. Like it's a big enough deal that it's like expanded into other parts of like nerd culture and internet culture and I guess just culture now. The Control is here. That I think it deserved more serious consideration than the treatment that Wired gave it. Um, Mostly because Wired was like, you can clearly see that this item in Control was this SCP, and I'm like, well, okay, that's cool, but for people who have no context as to what this is or like what these things are, like, why is
Mm-hmm.
this even in print?
Yeah. But yeah, and people know that it's been around, but like they think like Slender Man is just like some photoshops and a couple stories, and then of course those
Marble
murders.
Hornets. Yeah.
Yeah, and Marble Horn, yeah, and a bunch of web series that never go anywhere because they may not have known what they were doing.
Right.
Uh,
Or there was nowhere to go.
yeah.
Um,
Uh,
but
but
but in
in SCP is a huge body of literature. It's a subgenre well, it's its own like of speculative fiction because it's not there's horror, science fiction, and fantasy elements in it. It's not just horror.
Yeah, and like there it plays across like it's a syncretic thing in that like it plays across a bunch of different things simultaneously. So like um SCP-4004 um it's kind of hard to describe what it is because it's an amalgamation of thousands of different anomalous objects that have been bonded to the partially alive body of Emperor Norton, Joshua Abraham Norton, a sort of a famous character from San Francisco history, who was, like a local eccentric who acted as if he was the emperor of the United States, and
Mm-hmm.
everyone in San Francisco just sort of treated him, nicely and acted as if he was, and like heads of state would visit him when they were in town, like, ah, yes, the emperor of the United States. But the article is about how he actually was the emperor of an alternate universe, United States, and that his presence in our reality is actually like a function of US imperialism, right? Like you can get some like crossover between like Atlas Obscura style like strangeness with some like commentary on like the lengths to which we'll go to like create this the lengths to which the United States government will go like inform policy to create this thing uh that the United States is, right? Like it's it's bigger than just like uh spooky thing that uh you know makes you scared. It's like uh
Mm-hmm.
a source of like all science fiction, it's a place for people to comment on the world as it is and to reflect on the world as it was. So yeah.
I like that. I mean, yeah, Emperor Norton, yeah, who is an actual real person. This is not a creation of
No, he's
the
not.
SCP. Yeah,
He's an actual real historical figure.
yeah. Um, I love that. This is definitely a very unknown armies. The idea that his grave is attracting all these other occult objects. I I think, yeah, no, that's really cool. And that, again, it shows the variety of like what you can do. It's not just, I think a lot of the best SCPs are the ones that aren't necessarily the deadliest. I mean, they sort of like, there's, oh yeah, there's this whole classification system for SCPs, the Euclid, Keter, etc., kind of thing, like representing how dangerous it is. Like,
It's actually not danger, really. It's more about how easy it is to contain, and what its effects are. So, like a safe, if an SCP were safe, like it's just something you can put in a box and it'll stay in the box and won't do anything, right? So, like technically, a nuclear weapon is a safe SCP, right? As long as you don't turn it on and launch it at something, it's like pretty much just going to sit there. Something Euclid is something that will like active its effects, or uh, because it's intelligent, will actively resist containment in some way. But there's usually a pretty good way of like dealing with it. Keter things are things that are just so dangerous or strange or reality breaking that it's a very intense task to put them in containment. And then there's like other more esoteric containment types like Apollon or Thaumiel. I think Thaumiel is like an SCP that in existing contains other SCPs, so you don't want to like mess with it terribly much. And Apollon is like something that's beyond the ken of humankind to deal with, but we're kind of watching it from a distance to hopefully uh, keep it from doing stuff to us.
I like that one. Do you have any examples of that?
Yeah, I don't remember the number, but it's called the Deer, in all caps. Um, it's this like thing that appears to be like a deer made of like stellar matter. It is a god, and it was seen in the orbit of Saturn and appeared to notice that it was seen. And there's like a bunch of stories about it that I can't pull the plots out of my head. There's just too much material. But like the deer is a really good example of something Apollon level. Most of the SCP-001 entries, because there's several dozen SCP-1s, because like it's like a way for writers to demonstrate that they are really, really committed and really, really good. They'll come up with like some
Mhm.
crazy idea and make and nominate it as number one, and we don't really delete them unless they're bad. So there's like I think 10 SCP-001s, and most of them are pretty much Apollon, but like they're not necessarily classified that way because they might have been written before that was even a thing that was on the wiki.
Mhm.
So like the angel that guards the Garden of Eden is in there, as like, yeah.
That's a, yeah, I like that whole idea of reframing, theology as oh, we got to contain this thing. That was the
Yeah,
angel.
that one's really fun because like there's no photo of the angel. It's just sort of a heat map image that's kind of vaguely human shaped. Um, and there's this bit at the end where someone like tries to listen into the radio waves it's giving out, and it's just like screaming hymns into the stars in every direction. Like it's it's they're all very good in their own ways.
Yeah, no, I like that. So by the way, the deer, I looked it up, is SCP-2845.
Thank you
The
so
deer
much.
from Saturn. And yeah, no, it's very, very, very spooky. I like there's some art of it if you Google it. So I might have to use that for the episode art. Um so yeah, I guess at this point, are there any other SCP entries we haven't talked about that you'd like to give a shout out to? I guess.
I mean, if I could like, so I have the last entry I wrote for the wiki is SCP 4600. Um, it's functionally debt as an SCP. So like the reason I bring it
Mm-hmm.
up is not to like plug my own work, but to like plug the idea that like the SCP Foundation can include some very strange conceptual like kinds of horror. And in this case, I wrote up basically an article about how the SCP Foundation was like propping up global capital uh, by containing the notion of the evil eye to underdeveloped countries. Uh, the evil eye was sort of understood in like medieval times to be this like thing that would wreak havoc upon something good if it was acknowledged. But in this case, it's like a cosmic rebalancing force that uses human sight and perception as sort of its vehicle for understanding what is valuable and good in the world. But as it turns out, with like a global, massive like news sphere and global connectivity, it's really difficult for people to not notice that they don't have things. So it's sort of the increasingly desperate like attempt to keep uh, inequality where it is, uh, and that's
Wow.
yeah. So so that's SCP-4600. Uh, it's like cosmic debt, but like cosmic debt that you owe to everybody else around you because goodness actually is a finite resource, uh, and you can't hoard it all to yourself.
Yeah. I like it. I like it. It's a social commentary in my SCP Foundation. It's more
Perish the
likely than
thought,
you think.
right?
Yeah. So yeah, so there's tons of material for RPG players and game masters, obviously, for use of the SCP Foundation. You know, even if you're playing a game that's not with the SCP Foundation, you could say, "Oh, my character is secretly from the Serpent's Hand or the Chaos Insurgency," or,
Or my character is secretly an SCP themselves.
yeah,
They are anomalous, and
mhm.
they're working within the Foundation. They maybe don't even know that they're anomalous, but things happen to them, or they do things when certain criteria are met.
Mhm.
Um, and dealing with that and dealing with like the possible fallout of being imprisoned for life because sometimes when you sneeze things turn green, and I'm not talking about the thing coming out of your nose but like something unrelated. uh
Yeah.
yeah
Um, and I think one of the things I also like about the SCP Foundation is they clearly have no. It's compatible with all cosmologies of different horror settings because there's never been. I mean, obviously some entries would try to explain this is the reason why all this stuff works. You know, it's magic or it's science that we don't understand or it's, you know, hypergeometry or whatever. But there's no clear like unifying. The reason why all these things exist is because of X. It's just things. There's a bunch of weird things we don't understand why. There's no way to say there's no way for a single person to say the SCP Foundation is incompatible with your game because your game requires this to work and the SCP Foundation requires that to work. You know, something different. You know, like you can't have unknown army style magic in a game with the Cthulhu mythos, unless the Cthulhu mythos was a subset of that unknown army style human powered belief magic.
right
Yeah, because they're sort of diametrically opposed. The Cthulhu mythos is all about forces beyond our comprehension using alien science we don't comprehend to like fuck with us because we're just, you know, worms on the edge of existence. Whereas unknown armies, we did it. We're responsible for everything. All the supernatural stuff is just our collective belief in something and making it real. But in SCP, it's like, yeah, and I like that. So,
yeah, that's actually the subject of one of the 001s. The last line of it is that there is a god in this universe and it's a bunch of horror writers, right? So like
very meta.
yeah, it's super meta, but like the reason it's so malleable is because like you know it's that way by design. Like we're not here to tell you what you're allowed to feel scared by or allowed to incorporate in SCP. We're really here just to facilitate the writing of this stuff and to like make sure that the quality is consistent even if like tone or uh like specific like like in-universe cause is consistent. Where it's the whole point of this is that like the Foundation is going to try to preserve the world as they understand it, uh, regardless of what is involved. And try to prevent the supernatural from happening because that's what they do. and it doesn't actually matter what that supernatural thing is.
Cool. So thank you so much, Vince, for coming on the show. Is there anything you'd like to plug before you go?
I mean, I already plugged my own article.
Yeah.
I mean,
So-
like, I guess, like, if you're gonna be like looking at the SCP Foundation, you should also probably check out the Wanderer's Library wiki, because it's a completely different flavor of project, but it's related, and it has a lot of like strange and pretty work on it. There's like a 100-part story series about like somebody going on a dimensional foot journey where they just meet a bunch of strange characters, and it's sort of their diary in like, you know, uh sort of a coming of age Rumspringa sort of thing. But the longer you read it, the more inhuman you realize that this person is, even though they are still very clearly a person. So it's a nice fun read as opposed to like a scary read. So if you pop over to the Wanderer's Library, you can find that sort of thing.
Cool. Yeah, I know I'm gonna incorporate some more SCP Foundation stuff in my games in the future. Yeah. Thank you all for listening. I'm at Ross Payton on Twitter. Vince, you are
I mean, you can find me under a bunch of different names on Twitter. You can find the SCP Foundation at SCP Wiki, and then the Wanderer's Library at Wanderer's Library, but because it's not long enough, it's too long for Twitter's characters. And you can find me at Vincent D. Gabriel.
cool.
Be warned, my normal Twitter account is basically just news aggregation and like my professional stuff, so it's not super relevant to this podcast. Yeah.
All right. Fair enough. Thank you all for listening, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to the RPPR Patreon. We have tons of bonus podcasts and early access content. That's patreon.com/RPPR. And thank you all for listening. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.